So these are the topics that we're going to go over. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this since that's what we're going to be talking about. So I want to kind of touch on the general guidelines. The general instructions for NIH are commonly called the SF424 R&R. The version that we are using right now is Form F for just about everything. When we change between form versions, sometimes there will be a period of time when they're using two sets, so you've got to be careful when you're looking at your application instructions, which version that you're using. This was released in October the 16th, 2020. But one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that there can be significant changes to those general instructions and they won't reissue it. A lot of times they're updated 2 to 3 times a year. So if you download a copy for, say, you're going to do a submission in February, then you might want to go in and download a new copy if you're doing a submission in June or October. The general guidelines can also be updated by information that comes out in notices. And those usually start with an NOT and then a series of numbers. And they also have something called a NOSI, which is a notice of special interest that can come out related to something that has special funding related to it. An example of that would be like COVID research. And so you flag that on your application if you want to submit to that notice of special interest. So periodically look and see if you're using the most current general guidelines. The general guidelines aren't the only thing that you have to use as you prepare the proposals that you're working on. There's federal guidance. 2 CFR is the main one that has all your federal cost principles in it. You usually will have a specific program announcement that you're applying to, like a parent number or something like that. You can also be impacted by state or local information, especially if you've got state agencies involved in the proposal work with you. Another example would be that we use our negotiated rate agreement, which is particular to the University of Oklahoma. All of the links here should be active, and you will be able to get a copy of the slides if you contact Cindy. There's a lot of good information on this. So if you know someone who hasn't applied to a lot of NIH calls, you might want to refer them there because there's just tons of information and examples of forms and even little webinar things that they can watch. One of the things that I wanted to make you aware of, because the 424 series of guidance has like 3 or 4 versions all mushed together. So like there's the general research information, there's information on training proposals, and information on SBIR and STIR and fellowships all together. And it makes it kind of confusing and hard to understand. But if you go to this link, there are separate versions where they extract it out, like the research version. So if all you're going to be doing is research submissions, you might want to go and pull that extract out and use that instead of the full 424 R&R, because it'll be a lot easier to use. So the reason why we're doing this is there have been several notices that have come out lately in regards to biosketches and other support. We're going to go through each of these 3 individually. So the first one, 114, was just a reminder on NIH's policy on financial conflict of interest and having foreign involvement in proposals. They had some write-ups and comments related to investigations that were being done on NIH proposals, and felt like it would be good to put a reminder out to everyone and re-emphasize that if there was foreign activities or involvement, that you needed to make sure that you claimed it in your other support, and that if you had a conflict of interest, that it needed to be declared. And that other support meant all the resources that were being made available to the researcher. So that it was just a reminder. It's business as usual, but just in case you have overlooked it, this is what we're looking at. Then 21073 was a big change that they issued out, where they were going to update what was required in the format pages for the other support and have a new form for the biosketches that came out. And it was going to be effective on May the 25th, 2021, that you had to start using it. And we're going to go through these changes in a little bit more detail. So in the biosketches and the other support, some of the things that they were looking at changing was on the biographical sketch, section B would also have positions and scientific appointments and honors. It would cover all of those. And you wouldn't have a section D unless you were doing a fellowship. On the other support format page, it was reorganized, and they also added a signature block where you're certifying that what you're submitting is true and correct. And we'll go into that a little bit more too. Then we had 21-110 came out. There was such an outcry for people about this big change happening so rapidly. And so what they did was NIH pushed it off to January 25th, 2022. However, they still want you to make sure you provide the information related to any foreign involvement. They also noted in 21-110 something that we had heard a couple of times from different conferences that we've been to where we've had briefings from their policy office, that they are going to endorse using Science CV as the template to do other support. And they finally put a date to it, and they said in early fiscal year 2022, that is when they're going to require you to use Science CV to generate your other support form. So if you haven't already started enrolling in Science CV, that might be something that you want to look at doing. Tied to this also is a push for ORCID registrations. Some of the solicitations already coming out have that requirement as part of the submission information that you're going to provide. And we've been told that we'll see that more and more until their goal is that everyone who's doing business with the NIH is going to have an ORCID registration. So who needs a biosketch and when? So all senior and key personnel need a biosketch. You use the current format and have to make sure you use current instructions. A person who's on your key personnel doesn't necessarily have to be everyone who's involved in the proposal. It's someone who has a substantial contribution to the project. And this doesn't matter whether they're receiving salary or not. At proposal submission, you turn in that biosketch. But normally, when you're doing a just-in-time or a performance progress report, you'll turn those in if there's been any changes or if they're asked for by NIH when you're doing the JITs. The other support form, those are also for all senior and key personnel. You are required to use current formats and instructions. They may call it active and pending support or current and pending. We're seeing more of the specific solicitations are starting to call it current and pending, and that's to kind of align it with other federal agencies like NSF in what they're calling it. Normally, you don't need these at submission unless the specific solicitation asks for it. I've only seen that once or twice. Most of the time, they're going to ask for the other support form when they request just-in-time paperwork from you in anticipation of a possible award, or as you're doing your research performance progress reports. And those will be requested for everyone that you previously identified in the proposal submission as a senior or key person. So where do the forms go? When you're doing a submission, they go on the R&R Senior Key Personal Profile form. And the way we do it here at OU, you'll just send those files to us and your PDS will upload it for you. I mentioned before at submission, you normally don't need a current and pending form. Prior to award, they will usually ask you to come in and update your biosketch as needed and to provide other support forms for all the senior and key personnel. And then after, and this is done usually just in time, is normally done through ERA Commons. Once in a while, they'll ask for something sent by email to a program officer. Then after award, when you're doing your progress reports, you're going to provide updated biosketch and other support information. And those are normally put into ERA Commons, loaded by the PI, and then submitted on the PI's behalf by either ORS or RIFs. So we're going to go in a little bit further into the changes on the biographical sketch. So on NIH's website, they have a really good page that you can go to. The link is at the bottom of this form. I would recommend don't bother looking at anything before January 24, 2022. Go ahead and look at the information that's going to be required at the end of January, because you can use that information now. And as Michael mentioned, both OU Norman and HSC are going to start implementing using the new formats on July the 1st. And we'll touch on that a little bit more later. So basically on this site, they have a blank form, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. They have the instructions. They have a sample to show you what one looks like. And then they have pages and pages of FAQs of different questions that PIs have come across as they try to fill these out. So you want to make sure you look at those FAQs if you come across something that you're wondering about before you go back to a program officer and ask a question. So this is what the new form is going to look like. I want to point out to you in the top left where it says 02/28/2023, there are two versions of the NIH forms that are out now that have that end date on them. Both can be used until January. After January the 25th, you have to use the one that has no section D, and under section B, it says scientific appointments included with positions and honors. That's how you know you have the most current form, the one that's only acceptable by NIH in January. So just make sure for now that you're using the 02/28/2023 version. So the form entry information at the top is pretty much the same. They are still only allowing 5 pages for each biosketch. These are the sections. The education and training table is supposed to begin with your baccalaureate or equivalent and end with your postdoc. And you're supposed to include both the month and the year that you completed it. Your personnel statement had the biggest change in that it removes section D unless you're doing a fellowship. And there's a special link on NIH's website where you can pull a biosketch template down if you're doing a fellowship. You have to include information about your ongoing and completed support in the last 3 years. And this just goes through, a lot of this is the normal information that you had to provide. In your positions and honors, you have to list in chronological order, oldest to newest, in the positions that you've held. Any relevant academic and professional achievements or honors. And if you're a clinician, then you should include information on any clinical licensures or board certifications that you have. So the big change is that you have to add scientific appointments in this area too. Both domestic and foreign, and it includes any affiliations also. So it doesn't matter whether you're receiving funds for the positions or whether they're full-time or part-time or voluntary. So for example, let's say there's a university in London that you act on an advisory panel with, you don't receive any funds for it, they would consider this would be something that you would need to add as a scientific appointment. There weren't any changes to contributions to science. So make sure that you include URLs if you have published work related to those. They are recommending that you use My Bibliography to complete a digital list of your publications. And I mentioned before, the push is going to be going to Science CV. So if you're using Science CV, you'll be able to pull this down. Section D is only used if you're doing a fellowship submission. and this is related to your scholastic performance. And it doesn't have research information in it at all anymore. It only talks about scholastic performance. So in your other support page, let's look at that. So this is information, like we mentioned before, it could be current and pending. It's normally requested when you get to a just-in-time part of the process where you're being considered for award, and they want to make sure that there's no scientific or budgetary or commitment overlaps that are occurring in the work that you're doing. You're supposed to include all the resources that are being made available to you in support of or related to all of your research endeavors, whether or not they have monetary value or not, and we'll talk about that more in just a bit. So one of the big focuses that they have is any research or financial support that may be coming from foreign and domestic entities. It could be where they are providing materials or model systems or technology. It could be where you're sharing equipment. Maybe it's things that should be listed in your facilities and other resources if it's something that is made broadly available to a lot of the researchers that you normally work with. But if it's something that's only available to a select group, then it would be something that you would want to include in your other support form. If you have consulting agreements related to research types of work, then you should be putting that in your other support form. If it's not related to research, then you don't have to include it. If you are getting a contribution from someone, for example, they're giving you some type of media that you're going to be using in some testing that you're going to be doing, then you have to assign some type of dollar value to it. So the person who's giving you that material or that item should be the one giving you that value if at all possible. And if not, then you've got to figure out how you put a reasonable value to it in case someone comes back to you later and asks how you arrived at that figure. Other support doesn't have to include training awards, prizes, or gifts. A gift would be there's no expectation of any reporting related to it. You can use it however you want. And any item or service that has any types of time commitments or strings tied to it is not a gift, and then it should be reported in your other support. You don't have to include information on program directors or people who are categorized as other significant contributors. If you have a change in your other support, then you're supposed to make sure that that is updated in progress reports that you're doing. And if it's going to be a while before you do a progress report, it's recommended that you go ahead and contact your program officer and let them know that this change is happening. The only exception to this notification of changes is if you have a program director or your training faculty, or you have people that are just involved in the oversight of training. So effective on May the 25th, NIH expected the following: that you would have supporting documentation, including copies of contracts and agreements for anything related to a foreign appointment or employment with a foreign institution, for any activity or resources that you have that are being reported in other support. If the contracts or agreements are not in English, you have to provide a translated copy. The copy can't be translated by yourself, and it can't be translated by family members. It has to be an officially translated copy. A copy of this has to be provided as an additional PDF following the other support format page. And I mentioned before, anytime that you have a change that happens in your other support, then you want to make sure that you are declaring it. If you are doing your forms and you have forgotten and left something out, then as soon as you recall that you have it, you want to make sure that you let everyone know so things can be updated. On your other support, it has a tab similar to what the Biosketech had on the NIH website, where you can go and pull information down. They have the instructions, they have the format page, which we're going to look at in a minute, and they also, again, have several pages of FAQs where people have come in asking various questions related to, do I need to report this or do I need to report that? So those are good to look through too. So there's not an actual form like you have for the Biosketech for the other support form, but they do have like a little template for you to follow, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. And keep in mind that this whole other support format page is only going to be used for a short period of time. So from now until they fully implement that you have to use Science CV, which is expected in fiscal year 22. So you're only going to use this page for a little while. And the sooner that you get launched in Science CV, the sooner you can pull from that and you won't have to use this form at all. The other support has got several sections in it. They want to know about support that you've got related to projects and proposals. And then they want to know what you have in kind. They want to know if there's any overlap. And then you have a statement that you have to sign. And then if you have any foreign agreements or contracts, then that gets added as an attachment. So this is what the information looks like if you go to the link that's on NIH's page. You'll see it has very similar information to most current and pendings in what they're looking at. Like they want to know the title, who's providing the support, the name of the PI that's on it, how much you're getting, all that type of information. So you're supposed to provide your active, pending, and completed support within the last 3 years for all senior and key personnel, and they want it in the order of acting, pending, and completed support. Then you go to the section for in kind. Similar type of information. They want to know what kind of support it is, who's providing it, where the work's being done, the estimated dollar value. And then once you finish that, then you go into the overlap category. And that has to be provided. Basically, they're looking at if there's work that you're doing, say, Objective 3 on this proposal has some overlap with Objective 2 on the proposal that you have submitted. Well, how are you going to adjust those objectives? Are you going to go back and change the first one? Are you going to do some additional work in the proposal that you're doing now? How are you going to resolve the overlap? Because they want to make sure that they're not paying for work that someone else is already paying you to do. In the in-kind contribution section, they want you to enter those first with the active ones listed and then the pending ones listed. And I kind of mentioned before, the overlap section, they just want you to identify anything that has duplication. So if it's a budget item, if it's committed effort, just list that it is an overlap and how you're going to resolve it. If you don't have any overlap, then I recommend that you go ahead and include this section in your other support so that they don't think that you missed it. So this is the certifying statement that we've mentioned. It has to go on all of the other support form that you do. Each person who's filling one signs for their own information. They just want everyone to be very clear that you know that if you are providing fabricated information or claims, that they can choose to prosecute you. So don't forget, if you have foreign appointments or employment or activities and resources that are mentioned in other support, you have to provide copies of the contracts and agreements. We already covered that they have to be official translations, and they're provided as a PDF following the other support form. Locally, Michael already mentioned that we're going to start putting this in action on the 1st of July. so is OUHSC. So this means if, for example, you've got a performance report that's due at the end of July, then you and all your other key personnel will be expected to be using the new format. We're hoping to get everyone used to using the new forms and work out any bugs before the onslaught of proposal submissions start coming in January of next year. It is the PI's responsibility to complete their biosketch and other support files and to help obtain those files from all the other senior key personnel at other organizations. So your takeaway is don't delay in switching to using the new formats. You may need to create an Adobe signature if you haven't already. You do have to include anything that's providing support, whether it's paid or unpaid, for your research activities. We recommend that you give 2 to 3 days prior preparation in providing materials to submit so that you can take aware of the 2-day validation window. Something that I didn't mention before that came out in one of the recent notices and that NIH has been advertising is that effective January 2022, everyone who is listed on a senior key personnel form must have an ERA Commons ID. So if there's people that you normally work with at other organizations or at OU that have never given you an ERA Commons ID, then it would be good to go ahead and get with them this fall and make sure that they know that they need to get one assigned. And they also need to make sure that their profile shows the correct level that they're supposed to have. So if they're going to be a co-investigator or a PI, then that's the type of level in their profile that needs to be indicated, because if they had marked that they were like a research scientist, this will generate an error after the proposal's been submitted. I recommend that you start using Science CV and get your ORCID registrations as soon as you can. And there's a ton of information available at the NIH website related to this information and anything related to the proposal submissions. So recommend that you go there and look around. If you haven't been in a while, there's probably been some significant changes in what's available. Or if you or someone you know is just starting out doing submissions, there's a lot of good information there to pull from. Does anybody have any questions?
We don't have any in the chat, but since we have a small group, if you have a question, please feel free to unmute. Okay, it looks like we don't have any questions. So
if there's anything you need help with.
Hello, I've been, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you need anything, contact your PDS or contact ris@ou.edu. You can submit an info sheet and you'll get your PDS assigned and they can help answer any questions. We work pretty closely with the Center for Faculty Excellence, and they are doing some additional training. And they also have specific classes and assistance for doing the ORCID registrations and the Science